deep hollers of West Virginia don't just trap fog in the valleys. Sometimes they trap silence that feels heavy, like the woods are holding their breath. In 2019, while patrolling a dead-zone stretch of Route 19 near the tree line, my dashcam picked up a sound that wasn't mechanical. When I shined my spotlight into the mist, I saw it, standing on two legs 8 feet tall, with jet-black fur that seemed to drink the moonlight. The Appalachian Dogman isn't just mountain folklore to scare tourists. It laid siege to my cruiser for 3 hours. And before I tell you why the official report was redacted to say bear attack, leave a comment telling me if you believe the old stories about these woods, or if you think we're crazy. This story belongs to the mountains. Now let's head into the dark. There is a specific kind of dark you only find in the hollers of West Virginia. It's not just the absence of light. It's a physical weight, a heavy, suffocating blanket that presses against the windows of your cruiser and dares you to look too closely at what might be looking back. I've been a state trooper for 20 years. You do this job long enough and you stop seeing the romance in the mountains. You stop noticing the way the moonlight hits the rhododendrons or the majesty of the rolling peaks at sunrise. Instead, you start seeing the hazards: black ice on a blind curve, drunk drivers drifting across the yellow line on Route 19, the steep drop-offs that turn a momentary lapse of concentration into a fatal accident report. My name is Christopher Hughey. I'm 42 years old, though the face in the rearview mirror usually looks older. The shifts drag on you, etching lines around your mouth and planting gray at your temples long before your time. I have what my wife calls cop eyes, tired, dark brown, and always scanning, even when I'm trying to sleep. I'm a lean man, weathered by years of standing on asphalt in the rain and snow, and I carry myself with the stiff, deliberate posture of someone who spends too much time wearing a Kevlar vest. That night in late October 2019 started like 1,000 others. The rotation was the graveyard shift, 10:00 p.m. to 6:00 a.m., patrolling a desolate stretch of highway that snakes through the spine of the state. It's a sector most of the younger guys hate because of the isolation. There are no gas stations for 30 miles, no cell service, and long stretches where the radio waves just die against the limestone cliffs. We call them dead zones. You learn to live with them. You learn to trust that if things go sideways, you're on your own until you can drive your way back to a signal. I was sitting in my cruiser, parked on a gravel turnout overlooking a valley that had been swallowed by fog. The engine was idling, a low, comforting rumble that vibrated through the seat. The heater was blasting against the damp chill that manages to seep through the door seals no matter how new the vehicle is. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee from my thermos and checked the dashboard clock. 02:14 a.m. The witching hour. Logic tells you that 2:00 a.m. is just a time on a dial, a moment when the bars have closed and the deer are most active. But out here, when the fog rolls down off the ridges like slow-moving water, logic feels thin. The silence is absolute. No crickets. No wind in the pines, just the hum of the engine and the static hiss of the radio scanner waiting for a voice that wasn't coming. I picked up the mic mostly out of habit just to hear a human voice. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha, conducting a routine perimeter check on Route 19. All quiet, over." Silence. Then a crackle of static, followed by the faint, distorted voice of Roger Sullivan back at the station. "Copy that, 4 Alpha. Keep your eyes peeled. We had a report of a bear knocking over trash cans near the old mining road earlier. Probably halfway to Kentucky by now, but watch your 6. "Copy, Roger, 4 Alpha out." I chuckled to myself, shaking my head. A bear. In these parts everything was a bear. Strange noise, bear. Garbage scattered, bear. Shadow moving in the yard, bear. It was the catch-all explanation for people who didn't want to admit that the woods scared them. I was a rational man. I believed in bears. I believed in coyotes. I believed in meth heads looking for copper wire in abandoned substations. Those were things I could write in a report. Those were things I could handcuff or shoot. I put the cruiser in drive and pulled back onto the asphalt, the tires crunching over the gravel. The headlights cut twin cones through the mist, illuminating the yellow lines that guided me deeper into the nothingness. The trees on either side of the road were tall and dense, their branches interlacing overhead to form a tunnel that blocked out the stars. The isolation of the job is something they don't teach you at the academy. They teach you tactical driving, firearms proficiency, and the penal code. They don't teach you how to sit alone in a metal box for 8 hours while your mind tries to fill the silence. You start to feel like an intruder in a world that belongs to something else. The road feels like a scar on the landscape, and you're just a pathogen moving along it, tolerated but not welcome. As I rounded a sharp bend, the radio signal began to fade, Roger's potential chatter replaced by a rhythmic, undulating static. I was entering the deepest part of the dead zone. For the next 20 minutes, I would be a ghost. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, my knuckles white against the black leather. I wasn't scared, or at least I wouldn't have admitted it. I was alert, primal. My body knew something my conscious mind hadn't accepted yet. The hair on my arms was standing up beneath my heavy security jacket. The road ahead straightened out for a mile, a rare straightaway in this twisting topography. I pressed the accelerator, eager to get through the valley and back to higher ground where the radio worked. The cruiser surged forward, the speedometer climbing past 50, then 60. That's when the feeling hit me. It wasn't a sound. It was a sensation of being observed. Not by a person. People are clumsy, they break twigs and shine flashlights. This felt ancient. It felt like the mountain itself had opened an eye. I glanced at the passenger seat where my ticket book and backup flashlight sat. Empty. Safe. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing but red taillights bleeding into the fog. "Get a grip, Chris," I muttered to myself. "Too much coffee, not enough sleep." I tried to focus on the mundane details of the interior, the glow of the laptop screen, the smell of stale upholstery cleaner, the reassuring weight of the Glock 17 on my hip. These were the anchors of my reality. But the woods outside didn't care about my reality. They were vast and old and indifferent. And as I drove deeper into the pocket of silence, the fog seemed to thicken, swirling in the headlight beams like it was trying to form a shape. I didn't know it then, but I was driving past the point of no return. The safety of the station, of Roger's skeptical voice, of the laws I had sworn to uphold, it was all miles behind me now. Up ahead on the shoulder of the road, a dark shape materialized in the mist. I tapped the brakes, bringing the cruiser to a crawl as the shape sharpened in the high beams. It wasn't a stalled vehicle. It was organic, a heap of matted fur and tangled limbs sprawled across the double yellow line. "Dispatch, show me 1023 on Route 19, mile marker 42, I said into the mic, though the static was already chewing at the edges of the transmission. "Possible roadkill causing a lane obstruction. Gonna check it out." The radio hissed back, unintelligible. I wasn't surprised. I was deep in the bowl of the valley now, where the limestone cliffs swallowed signals whole. I racked the mic, switched on the light bar, and watched the world turn into a strobe-lit nightmare of red and blue shadows dancing against the cliff face. I didn't exit the vehicle immediately. That's a rookie mistake. You sit. You watch. You let the lights announce your presence and see if anything runs or if a drunk driver comes barreling around the bend. But nothing moved. The woods were statuesque, frozen in the heavy mist. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out, the cold mountain air instantly biting through my uniform. I rested my hand on the butt of my Glock, muscle memory, not intent, and unsheathed my heavy maglite. The beam cut a solid white tunnel through the fog, landing on the obstruction. It was a whitetail buck, a big one. Probably 10 points, the kind of trophy a hunter would spend all season freezing in a tree stand for, but it didn't look like a prize anymore. I approached slowly, my boots crunching on the wet asphalt. The silence was absolute. Usually, after a collision, there's the hiss of a radiator, the smell of antifreeze, or at least the sound of scavengers waiting in the brush. Here, there was nothing, just the rhythmic of my own heart in my ears. When I got within 5 feet, I stopped. The beam of my flashlight played over the animal and my stomach did a slow, uneasy roll. I've seen hundreds of deer hit by semis. I know what kinetic energy does to a biological frame. It's messy. It's chaotic. There's shattered glass, plastic bumper fragments, skid marks, and blood spray that stretches for 20 feet. This was different. The buck looked like it had been discarded. There were no tire tracks on the road, no debris. It was just there as if it had been dropped from the sky. I crouched down, shining the light closer. The animal was massive, easily 200 pounds, but it looked deflated. And then I saw the neck. It was twisted at an impossible angle, spiraled around so far that the antlers were digging into its own ribcage. The spine hadn't just been broken, it had been wrung out like a wet towel. I reached out with a gloved hand and touched the flank. It was still warm. This had happened minutes ago. "What hit you?" I whispered, my breath plumbing in the cold air. I circled the body, looking for the impact point. A truck hitting a buck this size at 50 miles an hour would have obliterated the front end of the vehicle. There should be a trail of wreckage, but the asphalt was pristine. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't the copper tang of blood nor the musk of a rutting buck. It was sharp and chemical, burning the back of my throat. Sulfur. Like a match struck right under my nose, mixed with something darker, the sweet, cloying scent of rotting meat, ancient and wet. It made no sense. The animal was fresh, warm to the touch, yet it smelled like it had been decomposing in a swamp for a week. I stood up, shining my light toward the tree line. The fog swirled, thick and impenetrable. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding flat and dead in the damp air. "Anyone out there?" No answer, just the pulsating silence of the holler. I looked back at the deer. The injuries were methodical. The ribs on the left side were caved in, not shattered outward like an impact, but crushed inward as if squeezed by a giant hydraulic press. And there was no blood. That was the detail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The pavement underneath the carcass was dry. My mind raced through the Rolodex of rational explanations. Poachers. Maybe they shot it, realized they couldn't load it, and dumped it. But there were no bullet holes. A bear. A bear would have mauled it, torn it open to get at the organs. This carcass was intact, just broken, twisted by a force that understood leverage but didn't care about biology. I felt a sudden, visceral urge to get back in the car. It was a primal alarm, the lizard brain screaming that I was exposed. I wasn't the apex predator here. I was just another soft thing standing in the dark. I took a step back toward the cruiser, my hand tightening on the flashlight. I needed to mark this, shove the carcass onto the shoulder so no one wrecked into it, and get moving. I didn't want to touch it again. The sulfur smell was getting stronger, drifting on a breeze that I couldn't feel. I grabbed the buck by the hind legs to drag it. It was heavy, dead weight in the truest sense. I heaved, sliding it across the asphalt. As the head flopped over the yellow line, the flashlight beam caught the buck's eyes. They were wide open, rolled back in terror, and mirrored in the glassy surface of the dead eye, caught in the reflection of my cruiser's flashing lights, I saw something standing at the edge of the woods behind me. I spun around, hand ripping the Glock from its holster, the flashlight beam sweeping the tree line in a frantic arc. "State Police, show yourself," I barked, the authority in my voice brittle. The beam cut through the mist, illuminating the gnarled trunks of oaks and the dense underbrush. Shadows danced and stretched as the red and blue strobes continued their silent rhythm. There was nothing there, just the empty road and the oppressive wall of the forest. I stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, gun leveled at the darkness. I could have sworn I saw a shape, tall, too tall for a man, standing just beyond the guardrail. But now only the fog stared back. "Get it together, Hughey," I hissed. You're spooking at shadows. I holstered the weapon, though my hand shook slightly. I grabbed a road flare from the trunk, cracked it, and set its sputtering, hissing red light near the carcass. The sulfur smell was overpowering now, choking out the clean mountain air. I got back into the cruiser and locked the door. The sound of the lock clicking down was the most comforting thing I'd heard all night. I grabbed the radio mic again, determined to raise Roger, to hear a voice that made sense, to tell him about the deer that defied physics and the smell of hell that lingered on the highway. But as I reached for the dial to boost the squelch, I noticed the radio wasn't just static anymore. It was making a sound, a low, rhythmic interference that synced perfectly with my own rapid breathing. I stared at the radio display, the amber digits glowing softly in the dark cab. The rhythmic interference, that deep, heaving sound like a lung struggling for air, had vanished the moment I keyed the mic, replaced by the familiar, sharp hiss of white noise. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, my hand trembling slightly as I pressed the button again. "Dispatch, this is 4 Alpha. Do you copy? Over." A burst of static, then a voice cut through, tinny and distant but undeniably human. "4 Alpha, I read you. Signal's choppy, Chris. You're down in the soup. What's the status on that obstruction?" It was Roger Sullivan. Hearing his voice was like waking up from a nightmare. Roger was a 20-year veteran of the desk, a man whose entire world consisted of coffee, paperwork, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the Charleston Command Center. He dealt in facts, response times, and license plate numbers. He was the anchor to a reality that made sense, a world where cause always preceded effect. "Yeah, Roger, I'm clear of the vehicle," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead, leaving a smudge of grime. "It's a buck. Big one. 10-pointer easy. It was blocking the northbound lane." "Copy that," Roger's voice crackled, sounding bored. "Just drag it to the ditch and 10-8 yourself back to patrol. Animal control can scrape it up in the morning." "Roger, hold on," I said, glancing out the window. The flare I'd lit was sputtering on the asphalt, casting long, dancing shadows against the wall of fog. "Something's not right here. The animal, there's no blood, no impact debris, no skid marks." There was a pause on the line. I could picture Roger leaning back in his chair, probably rolling his eyes at the rookie-sounding hesitation coming from a senior trooper. "No blood?" Roger asked, the skepticism heavy in his tone. "Chris, if a semi hits a deer at 50, it's not gonna bleed out on the spot. Internal hemorrhage. Probably got clipped and stumbled there to die." "No," I insisted, my grip tightening on the mic. "The neck is twisted 360, ROG, spiral fracture, and the ribs are crushed in. It looks like someone wrung it out like a washcloth, and the pavement is bone dry." "Coyotes," Roger said promptly, "or a bear. They'll drag a kill around, lick the blood up. You know how it is out there." "Bears don't snap spines like that," I countered, feeling a flush of frustration. "And they don't leave the meat. This thing is fully intact. And the smell, Roger, it smells like a chemical fire. Sulfur and ammonia, it's sticking to my uniform." "Sulfur?" Roger chuckled, a dry, raspy sound over the speaker. "Probably skunk spray mixed with road rot. Or maybe you're parking too close to one of those old mine vents. The wind shifts, drags that methane up from the shafts. It plays tricks on your head." I looked out at the dark tree line. The logic was sound. It was safe. It was exactly the kind of explanation I would have given a rookie a few years ago. Mine gas, scavengers, physics. But my nose was still burning, and the skin on the back of my neck was still crawling with the sensation of being watched. "I'm telling you, Rog, this feels off," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "I got a bad vibe. I thought I saw movement in the tree line, something tall." "Tall?" Roger's tone shifted from bored to patronizing. "Like a person?" "No, bigger." "Jesus, Chris," Roger sighed. "You've been on shift too long. It's the fog. It magnifies everything. Shadows look like monsters. Raccoons sound like footsteps. You remember Miller, called in a suspicious figure last year that turned out to be a stump with a trash bag stuck to it. I know what I saw, I snapped. Then immediately regretted the sharpness in my voice. I took a breath. I'm just saying, mark it in the log, suspicious activity, possible predator in the area. I'll mark it, Roger said, placating me now. I'll put down Trooper spooked by Bambi. Look, finish up, get back in the car and drive up to the ridge. Get some fresh air. You're sounding ragged. I'm not spooked, I lied. Sure, just get clear. 4 Alpha shows status as clear in 5. Yeah, clear in 5, I muttered. The radio clicked off, leaving me alone in the silence again. I sat there for a moment, having the feeling of uncertainty that Roger's rationality had planted in my chest. He was right, wasn't he? I was tired. It was dark. The mind seeks patterns where there are none. A bear kills a deer, gets spooked by my lights, runs off. The sulfur is just gas from the coal seams. The twisted neck is just freak physics. I looked at the dashboard clock. 02:35 a.m. I needed to believe Roger. I needed to believe that the world was boring and predictable. Because if Roger was wrong, if the thing I saw in the reflection of the deer's eye wasn't a shadow or a trick of the mist, then the gun on my hip was nothing more than a paperweight. I convinced myself to move. Procedure, I told myself. Follow the steps. I checked my mirrors. Clear. I put the cruiser in reverse to give myself room to pull around the carcass, intending to leave the flare burning as a warning for other drivers. As I shifted gears, the headlights swept across the tree line one more time. And that's when the logic broke. My high beams caught the reflectors on the guardrail flashing silver. But 20 yards beyond that, deep in the thicket where the fog was densest, 2 distinct points of light reflected back. They weren't silver. They weren't the red-orange of a raccoon or the green of a deer. They were yellow, sickly, pale yellow, and they were high off the ground 6, maybe 7 feet up. I froze, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. The eyes didn't blink. They didn't bob or weave like an animal sniffing the air. They just floated there, steady and unmoving, locked onto the cruiser. Roger, I whispered, reaching for the mic again, my voice trembling. Roger, I got eyes, 2 o'clock position. Static. Dispatch, I said louder. Nothing but the white noise hiss. The connection was gone again. The dead zone had swallowed Roger's voice, taking his logic and his skepticism with it. I was alone with the eyes. And as I watched, transfixed by the yellow glow, the lights slowly began to rise, as if whatever owned them was standing up from a crouch. The yellow eyes didn't just blink out. They receded. They drifted backward into the soup of the fog, maintaining that impossible height, like 2 lanterns being carried away by a retreating ghost. I sat frozen, my boot pressed against the brake pedal so hard my leg began to tremble. My hand was still gripping the radio mic, the plastic slick with sweat despite the biting cold of the cabin. Roger, I whispered again, uselessly. The speaker crackled, spitting a burst of white noise that sounded mocking in the silence. I was alone. The logic in my brain, the part that had written thousands of tickets and filed hundreds of accident reports, tried to scramble for purchase. Owl, it suggested. A great horned owl sitting on a low branch. That would explain the height. It would explain the yellow eyes. But an owl doesn't have eyes set that far apart. An owl doesn't possess a gaze that feels heavy, a gaze that carries the weight of intelligence. And an owl certainly doesn't stand up. I released the mic and grabbed the handle of the A-pillar spotlight, twisting it violently to the left. The beam sliced through the mist, illuminating a patch of gnarled oak trees and thick rhododendron bushes. The light caught nothing but wet bark and dripping leaves. The shadows stretched and warped as I swept the beam back and forth, turning the woods into a shifting kaleidoscope of gray and black. Come on, I muttered, my teeth clenched. Show yourself. I needed verification. I needed to know that I wasn't losing my mind, that the isolation and the graveyard shift hadn't finally snapped something in my psyche. I reached into the passenger seat bag and fumbled for the FLIR thermal monocular. It was standard issue for rural units, mostly used for finding lost hikers or fugitives hiding in cornfields. I rarely used it. Usually, a flashlight was enough. Tonight, the darkness felt thick enough to touch. I brought the monocular to my eye, the small screen flaring to life with a grainy, grayscale image. The world turned into a negative of itself. Trees were dark, cold skeletons. The road was a cool gray ribbon, and the hood of my cruiser glowed white-hot from the engine block. I rolled down the window just an inch, enough to get the lens clear of the glass but not enough to let the night in. The sulfur smell was still there, fainter now, but lingering like a stain on the air. I scanned the tree line where I'd seen the eyes. At first there was nothing, just the cold, dead landscape of the forest. I swept the device slowly to the right, following the line of the guardrail. Then I saw it. A heat signature bloomed on the screen, a brilliant, burning white mass standing amidst the cold gray of the brush. It was massive. The heat radiating from it was intense, far brighter than the dull glow of a deer or a raccoon. It was shaped roughly like a man, broad shoulders, a tapered torso, but the proportions were wrong. The chest was too thick, the neck buried in muscle. And it was watching me. I held my breath, the monocular pressed to my eye socket. "Gotcha," I whispered, though the triumph tasted like ash. It wasn't a bear. A bear is a round, lumbering blob on thermal. This thing had posture. It was standing behind a cluster of saplings, partially obscured, but the heat signature leaked through the branches like fire. Then it moved. Physics dictates that mass requires energy to move. A body that size, and judging by the heat bloom, it had to weigh 400 pounds, should have to shift its weight, push off the ground, and gather momentum. The figure on my screen didn't do that. 1 second it was there, standing by the oak tree. The next second the screen was empty. I jerked the monocular to the left, thinking I'd missed it. Nothing. I swept right. Nothing. Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I widened my search, scanning deeper into the woods. There, 50 yards to the left, the heat signature appeared again, standing perfectly still. My mind couldn't reconcile the gap. To cover that distance in under 2 seconds, through dense underbrush and uneven terrain without making a sound, it was impossible. A deer crashing through that thicket would have snapped branches. A man would have stumbled. This thing had teleported. I watched it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The figure was closer now. It had moved parallel to the road, closing the distance between the tree line and the pavement. I lowered the monocular for a split second to look with my naked eyes. The spotlight beam washed over the area where the thermal showed the heat. Nothing, just fog and shadows. I brought the thermal back up. The white-hot figure was still there, burning in the invisible spectrum. It was camouflaged. Or maybe it was just that the fur I'd seen earlier, that jet-black coat, absorbed the visible light so completely that the spotlight simply died against it. The creature took a step. On the thermal screen I saw the legs, digitigrade dog-like legs with high hocks, lift in place with deliberate, predatory grace. It wasn't running. It was stalking. "Dispatch 4 Alpha," I said, my voice cracking. I didn't care that the radio was dead. I needed to speak the words to make them real. Subject is moving parallel to my position. Large heat signature, fast, extremely fast. The radio remained silent. I watched the screen as the figure dipped low, moving behind the cover of a large boulder. I waited for it to emerge on the other side. I waited 5 seconds, 10. It didn't come out. I scanned left, I scanned right. The heat signature had vanished again. A cold realization washed over me, colder than the mountain air seeping through the cracked window. If it wasn't behind the rock, and it wasn't to the left or right. I whipped the monocular toward the rear of the cruiser, scanning the road behind me. Nothing. I turned back to the front, pointing the device straight ahead through the windshield. At the very edge of the headlight beams, right where the fog swallowed the road, a small, intense patch of heat flared for a second before ducking below the guardrail. It was circling me. It was testing the perimeter, looking for a blind spot. It knew I was in the metal box. It knew I was watching, and it was playing with me. I dropped the thermal unit into my lap and slammed the window shut, hitting the lock button on the door panel hard enough to bruise my thumb. The click of the solenoids echoed in the cab, but it felt flimsy. Thin glass and aluminum sheets were all that separated me from the thing in the mist. I reached for the gear shift, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I needed to leave. Protocol be damned. The deer carcass, the investigation, the bear, none of it mattered. I needed to get to the ridge. I needed to hear Roger's voice. But as my hand touched the shifter, a sound cut through the heavy silence of the night. It wasn't the radio. It wasn't the engine. It was a soft, wet thud on the roof of the cruiser. Then the sound of claws, sharp and hard, slowly dragging across the metal directly above my head. The sound of claws on the roof wasn't a scratch. It was a gouge. It was the screech of hard keratin stripping away clear coat and biting deep into the galvanized steel. The entire frame of the Crown Victoria groaned under the sudden, impossible weight, the suspension compressing with a sickening lurch that rocked the cabin violently from side to side. I stopped breathing. My hand froze halfway to the gear shift, hovering in the air like a dead thing. Above me, the metal popped and pinged as the weight shifted. I stared up at the fabric headliner, waiting for it to tear open, waiting for black claws to punch through and drag me out into the dark. The breathing I had heard on the radio was audible now without amplification. It was a wet, heavy rasp, muffled by the roof but vibrating through the chassis. Huff, huff, huff. It sounded like a massive engine idling, primal and hungry. Then the weight disappeared. The cruiser sprang up on its shocks, bouncing on the springs. There was a heavy, dull thud on the asphalt directly in front of the bumper, shaking the dashboard. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought the plastic might snap. My eyes were locked on the hood, watching the twin beams of the headlights cut into the swirling wall of fog. At first there was only the mist, churning in the wake of whatever had landed there. Then a shadow began to solidify. It rose from a crouch, unfolding itself with a terrifying, fluid grace that defied the laws of biomechanics. It didn't scramble up like a bear or jerk upright like a deer. It stood up like a man. A very, very large man. The figure kept rising. It passed the height of the grille. It passed the height of the hood. It kept going until its shoulders were level with the roof of my cruiser. I craned my neck back, my mind refusing to process the geometry of what I was seeing. The creature standing in my high beams was massive, easily 8.5 feet tall. It blocked out the road. It blocked out the tree line. It was a wall of muscle and fur that seemed to drink the light. The spotlight I had aimed earlier was useless against it. The creature's fur was a deep, void-like black, a matte darkness that absorbed the lumens rather than reflecting them. It looked like a hole had been punched in the fabric of the night. But the headlights caught the details. God help me, they caught the details. The legs were wrong. They were digitigrade dog-like legs with high, powerful hocks that bent backward, ending in massive paws that were splayed out on the asphalt. The claws were black sickles, thick as my fingers, clicking against the road surface as it shifted its weight. Moving up, the anatomy shifted into something grotesquely humanoid. The torso was a V-shaped slab of muscle, rippling beneath the sleek coat. It had the build of a powerlifter, broad and tapered, with pectorals that heaved with every breath. But it was the arms that made my blood run cold. They were long, too long, hanging down past its knees, and at the end of those muscular limbs weren't paws. They were hands. They were covered in dark, coarse hair, but the structure was undeniable. A thumb, 4 fingers. They were articulate, grasping hands tipped with razor-sharp black talons. I watched as the creature flexed them, the tendons in its forearms jumping under the skin. It wasn't an animal paw designed for running, it was a manipulator. A hand designed to grab, to open, to tear. I tried to swallow, but my throat was sandpaper. Bear, my brain whispered, a broken record skipping on a scratch. It's a bear with mange. It's a guy in a suit. Then the creature turned its head. The snout was long and tapered, filled with rows of teeth that gleamed white and wet in the harsh halogen light. The lips were pulled back in a permanent, structural snarl, exposing gums that looked black and necrotic. And the eyes. They were the same yellow lights I had seen floating in the woods, but up close, they were terrifyingly distinct. They weren't the flat, reflective orbs of a wild animal acting on instinct. They were amber irises with pinpoint pupils, burning with a calm, malevolent intelligence. It looked at the car. It looked at the light bar flashing on the roof, and then it looked directly through the windshield. It looked at me. The shock of recognition hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I didn't know the scientific name for this. I didn't know the genus or species, but deep down, in the reptilian part of my brain that remembers when we weren't the top of the food chain, I knew what it was. I had heard the stories in the diner, the old-timers talking about the Dogman, about the thing that stalked the ridges and screamed like a woman. I had laughed. I had called it hillbilly superstition, the result of too much moonshine and isolation. But as those yellow eyes bored into mine, stripping away 20 years of law enforcement training and leaving me as a naked, trembling primate in a metal box, the laughter died. The creature tilted its head slightly, a gesture that was sickeningly human. It was assessing me. It wasn't afraid of the car. It wasn't afraid of the lights. It was curious. It was wondering if the soft meat inside the hard shell was worth the effort of peeling it open. The sulfur smell intensified, leaking through the vents of the cruiser, thick and cloying like rotten eggs and old blood. It filled the cabin, making my eyes water and my stomach heave. My hand dropped from the gear shift to the Glock on my hip. I unsnapped the retention strap, the sound loud in the quiet cab. The creature's ears, tall, pointed, and tufted with black hair, twitched. It heard the snap. Its lips curled back further and a low rumble vibrated the hood of the car. It wasn't a growl. It was a laugh, a deep, guttural, mocking sound that resonated in my bones. It took a step forward, then another. It was walking toward the driver's side door. "No," I whispered, my voice sounding like a stranger's. "No, no, no." I fumbled for the window switch, checking it for the 10th time to make sure it was up. I hit the lock button again. Click, click. The creature loomed over the side of the car. Up close, the sheer scale of it was overwhelming. I was looking up at its chest. I could see the scars on its muzzle, the matted fur around its neck. It didn't attack immediately. It just stood there, towering over me, breathing fog onto the glass. It raised one of those terrible, hand-like paws and slowly reached out. One black claw, thick as a railroad spike, touched the glass. Scritch. It traced a line down the window, right in front of my face. The glass didn't shatter, but it groaned under the pressure. The creature was testing the barrier. It was showing me how fragile my safety really was. Then it leaned down, bringing that wolfish nightmare face inches from the glass, staring directly into my soul with those hateful yellow eyes. I realized then that Roger was wrong. The bear hadn't knocked over trash cans. The bear hadn't run to Kentucky. The monster was here, and I was trapped in its cage. The creature didn't smash the glass. It didn't tear the door off its hinges. Instead, after that eternity of eye contact, it simply left. It pushed off the door frame with a grunt, the metal shuddering under its paws, and melted backward into the fog. The yellow eyes held mine for one last second before the mist swallowed them whole, leaving me alone in the strobe-lit silence of the cruiser. I sat there, hyperventilating, the air in the cab tasting stale and recycled. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, loud enough to drown out the idling engine. "It's gone," my brain lied. "You scared it. The lights, the size of the car, it's an animal and it backed down." My rational mind, the part of me that had survived 20 years on the force, began to claw its way back to the surface. It was desperate to reframe the last 5 minutes into something manageable. It told me the creature was a biological curiosity, a freak of nature, but still an animal. And animals ran from loud noises and authority. I looked at the dashboard. The radio was still dead static. The engine temp was climbing slightly, probably from the radiator being blocked or damaged when the thing landed. I needed to move, but I couldn't just drive blind. If that thing had slashed my tires or severed a brake line, hitting the gas on these winding cliffs would be suicide. I needed to check the perimeter. I needed to verify the vehicle's integrity before I tried to run. It was the stupidest decision of my life. But in that moment, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate need to reclaim some shred of control, it felt like procedure. I grabbed the handle of the spotlight and swept the area one last time. Nothing. Just the gray swirl of the mist and the dark skeletons of the oaks. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I unlatched the door. It creaked, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. I stepped out, my boots hitting the asphalt. The cold air rushed in, instantly soaking through my sweat-dampened uniform. I drew my Glock 17, the familiar weight of the polymer grip offering a false sense of security. I brought it up to a low, ready position, snapping the tactical light on. "West Virginia State Police," I bellowed into the darkness. "Show yourself." My voice cracked, lacking the command presence I usually carried. It sounded small, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the holler. I circled the front of the cruiser, keeping my back to the metal. I checked the front driver's side tire. It was holding air. I checked the hood. There were two massive dents, deep depressions where the creature's paws had landed, but the engine was still purring. "I'm armed," I shouted again, aiming the gun at the tree line where the eyes had vanished. "Come out." Silence. I began to feel foolish. Maybe Roger was right. Maybe the stress had finally broken me. I was standing in the middle of Route 19, screaming at the fog, waving a gun at shadows. I lowered the weapon slightly, exhaling a shaky breath that plumed white in the beam of my flashlight. Then the mountain answered. It wasn't a howl. A howl is lonely, it's a sound of communication. This was a roar. It erupted from the darkness directly in front of me, a wall of sound so physical it vibrated in my chest cavity. It was a guttural, wet explosion of noise, part bear, part wolf, and something horribly, undeniably human screaming in rage. It was the sound of a predator that had been insulted by the prey's refusal to die. The sheer volume of it paralyzed me. My ears rang, the high-pitched whine masking the sound of my own gasp. And then the fog parted. 30 yards away, the black shape materialized. It wasn't walking this time. It was charging. It dropped onto all fours, moving with a terrifying fluid speed. It covered ground faster than anything organic should be able to move. I saw the muscles bunch and release, the black fur rippling like oil. It was a missile of muscle and hate, closing the distance in heartbeats. I raised the Glock. My hands were shaking so bad the front sight post was dancing all over the target. Bang, bang, bang. I fired 3 rounds. The muzzle flashes were blinding stabs of light in the darkness. I heard the thwack-thwack of bullets hitting. Something, maybe a tree, maybe the asphalt, maybe the beast. It didn't slow down. If I hit it, the creature didn't care. It didn't flinch. It didn't stumble. It just kept coming, its mouth open in a snarl that exposed a gullet of black rot and ivory teeth. I looked at the gun in my hand. It was a standard issue 9. Against a human, it was lethal. Against this nightmare, it looked like a child's toy. I might as well have been throwing pebbles at a freight train. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I am not the authority here. The creature was 20 yards away, 10. I turned and scrambled for the door. My boots slipped on the wet pavement and I nearly went down, my knee slamming into the rocker panel. I scrabbled at the handle, my fingers numb and clumsy. The sound of claws clicking on asphalt was right behind me. Click, 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 click. Fast, heavy. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, not bothering to sit properly. I fell across the center console, my legs tangling in the steering wheel. A massive black shape filled the open doorway. I kicked out wildly, my boot connecting with something hard and furry. A roar blasted into the cabin, smelling of sulfur and copper. I grabbed the interior door handle and ripped it shut with every ounce of strength I had left. Slam! The latch engaged a microsecond before a heavy weight slammed into the metal from the outside. The entire car rocked violently onto two wheels, teetering for a terrifying second before crashing back down. I scrambled upright, locking the door and jamming my back against it, gun raised, heart trying to explode out of my chest. A fist, a giant hairy clawed fist, slammed against the window right next to my ear. The safety glass spiderwebbed instantly, turning opaque white, but it held. For now, I was back in the cage, but this time the monster wasn't just curious, it was furious. And as I watched the cracks in the window begin to spread, I realized that my retreat hadn't bought me safety. It had just bought me time, and I was running out of it. I had just slammed the door on a living nightmare. The creature was outside, I was inside, and the lock had just clicked shut. In just a moment, I'm going to tell you exactly what happens when 800 pounds of primal rage decides to tear a police cruiser apart with a trooper trapped inside. But first, if you want to survive more true horror stories from the forgotten corners of the map, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and have hit that notification bell. We share the encounters the authorities try to hide, and you don't want to miss the next warning. Now, let's see if the glass holds. The safety glass of the driver's side window held, but only just. The spiderweb fracture had turned the world outside into a milky, fragmented blur, obscuring the monster but not the shadow of its bulk. I scrambled backward, jamming myself against the passenger door, my boots slipping on the console, the Glock leveled at the opaque white sheet that separated me from death. Then the shadow disappeared. For a heartbeat there was silence, the kind of silence that happens right after a car crash before the screaming starts. I could hear the engine idling, a rough, sputtering sound now, as if the car itself was trembling. Then came the impact. It wasn't on the door this time. It was above me. The entire cruiser lurched downward, the suspension bottoming out with a metallic clang that rattled my teeth. The roof buckled instantly under the sudden, massive weight. I watched in horror as the fabric headliner above the driver's seat stretched and tore, revealing the gray metal roof panel which was now bowing inward like a crushed soda can. The sound that followed was worse than the roar. It was the screech of hard keratin dragging across reinforced steel, a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that sounded like the car was screaming in pain. The creature was walking on the roof. It was packing, heavy, deliberate steps directly over my head. I could track its movement by the way the roof dented downward with each footfall, forcing me to shrink lower into the passenger seat. It wasn't just attacking blindly, it was looking for a way in. It was testing the structural integrity of the cage. "Dispatch, Mayday, Mayday," I screamed into the radio mic, my voice shredding with panic. "Officer needs assistance. Route 19, mile marker 42, I have a hostile subject, send backup, send everything." The radio didn't even offer me the comfort of static. It was dead silent, the amber lights of the display flickering as the electrical system surged and dipped. The creature was heavy enough that it might have been crushing the wiring harness running through the pillars. "Roger, answer me, damn it." I smashed the mic against the dashboard, sobbing in frustration. Anyone, I am under attack. The packing stopped. The weight settled directly over the center of the cabin. Then the pounding began. Wham! The roof caved in another 3 inches. Dust and debris rained down from the torn headliner, coating the dashboard in gray grit. Wham! The dome light shattered, showering the center console with plastic sparks. The metal groaned, a deep, mournful sound of steel being pushed past its yield point. I realized with a jolt of ice-cold terror that it wasn't trying to tear the roof off. It was trying to crush the cabin in. It was trying to flatten the car like a tin can with me inside. I raised the Glock toward the ceiling, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Get off!" I roared, the sound pathetic in the confined space. "Get off my car!" I didn't fire, logic or what was left of it screamed that a 9-round fired at a shallow angle into a steel roof would likely ricochet back and kill me before it hurt the beast. I was trapped by my own armor. The creature shifted its weight again, the car swaying violently. I heard the sickening crunch of the light bar being pulverized. The rhythmic blue strobe that had been pulsing against the fog suddenly died, plunging the periphery into darkness. Now, the only light came from the headlights cutting a tunnel into the mist ahead and the dim green glow of the instrument panel. Suddenly, a massive black claw hooked over the top edge of the windshield. It punched through the glass like a spear, sending a spray of safety shards flying into the dashboard. I flinched, shielding my eyes with my arm. The claw hooked the metal frame of the roof and pulled. The screech of tearing metal was deafening. The creature was peeling the top of the windshield frame back, creating a gap big enough for a snout. The smell flooded the cabin instantly, concentrated sulfur, wet rot, and the metallic tang of old blood. It was so strong I gagged, retching dryly. Through the hole in the windshield, I saw them. The yellow eyes. It was hanging upside down over the front of the car, staring in at me through the gap it had made. Its face was inverted, a mask of nightmarish geometry, lips peeling back to reveal teeth that looked too large for its jaw. It wasn't roaring now. It was making a low, chuffing sound. It was laughing at me. "Backup is not coming," a voice in my head whispered. It wasn't Roger's voice. It was my own, cold and final. "You are going to die in this seat." The creature lashed out. A hand, distinctly a hand, with a thumb and grasping fingers, smashed into the already comprised driver's side window. The safety glass, weakened by the first blow, finally gave up. It imploded with a loud crump, showering the driver's seat with diamonds of glass. The wind rushed in, cold and violent, carrying the fog with it, and with the wind came the arm. The black, fur-covered limb shot through the broken window, groping blindly for me. It swiped across the steering wheel, ripping the leather cover. It slashed at the air, the claws missing my face by inches. I pressed myself flat against the passenger door, my boots scrambling on the floor mats, trying to push myself through the metal skin of the car. I was screaming now, a wordless, primal sound of absolute terror. The arm retracted for a second, then shot back in, this time lower. It grabbed my tactical bag from the driver's seat and ripped it out into the night as if it weighed nothing. I heard the fabric tear and the contents spill onto the road. It wanted me. It was reaching for my leg. "Back, get back." I pointed the gun at the window, but I couldn't shoot. The angle was wrong. The creature's body was shielded by the door pillar. The creature roared again, so close that I felt the heat of its breath wash over me. It grabbed the door frame with both hands, one through the window, one hooking the roof, and began to shake the entire car. The cruiser rocked violently, the tires lifting off the asphalt. My head slammed against the passenger window. The world spun. I was being rattled like a pill in a bottle. The suspension groaned, metal screaming against metal. It was going to flip the car, or it was going to rip the door off. Either way, the cage was failing. I looked at the radio one last time. Darkness. I looked at the cell phone lying on the floorboard. no service. I was 20 miles from the nearest town. I was trapped in a box that was rapidly becoming a coffin, and the thing outside knew it. The shaking stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with violence. I panted, clutching the gun, watching the open window. Then slowly, the massive black head filled the frame of the broken window. It pushed inside the cabin, shoulders squeezing through the opening, jaws snapping inches from the steering wheel. It was in the car with me. The smell hit me first, a suffocating wave of hot copper, rot, and wet dog that filled the small cabin instantly. It was the scent of a grave that had been clawed open in the heat of summer. The creature's head was massive, taking up half the airspace in the front seat. Its shoulders were wedged into the window frame, the metal groaning as it forced its way inside. I could hear the snap hiss of its breathing, could feel the wet heat of it radiating against my face. It wasn't just an animal invading my space. It was a violation of the natural order. A wolf shouldn't be this big. A wolf shouldn't be able to look at the tactical laptop, the radio, and then me with a calculation that felt distinctly, terrifyingly human. I was pressed so hard against the passenger door that the handle dug into my ribs. My boots slipped on the shattered glass covering the floor mats. There was nowhere left to go. The cruiser, once my fortress, was now just a trap. The creature lunged. It wasn't a clumsy bite. It was a targeted snap, its jaws closing inches from my neck with a sound like a bear trap springing shut. Clack. Saliva sprayed across my cheek, hot and viscous. I screamed, a raw, involuntary sound that scraped my throat and kicked out with my left boot. My heel connected with its snout, a solid, meaty thud. It didn't flinch. It didn't pull back. Instead, a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the chassis of the car. The creature turned its head slightly, its yellow eyes narrowing. It looked annoyed, like I was a toy that was proving difficult to unwrap. It reached out with that long, clawed hand, the black fur matted with rain and mist. It grabbed the steering wheel, bending the hardened plastic ring in half like it was made of putty, to leverage itself deeper into the cab. Its other hand swiped at me, the talons snagging the fabric of my uniform jacket. I heard the rip, felt the cold burn of a claw grazing the skin of my shoulder. Die, I shrieked. I raised the Glock. There was no room to extend my arms, no room for a proper stance. I held the weapon close to my chest, the barrel angled upward toward the nightmare filling my vision. I squeezed the trigger. Boom! The sound of a gunshot inside a closed vehicle is indescribable. It's not a bang. It's a pressure wave that slams into your skull and obliterates your equilibrium. My ears instantly shut down, replaced by a high-pitched, screaming tinnitus. But it was the light that seared the memory into my brain forever. The muzzle flash was a brilliant, blinding strobe of orange fire in the dark cabin. For a fraction of a second, the world was frozen in high-definition horror. The flash illuminated the creature's face just inches from the barrel. I saw everything. I saw the coarse texture of the black fur around its muzzle. I saw the jagged scar running down its left cheek, pink and puckered against the dark hide. I saw the black gums, the thick gray tongue lolling behind rows of serrated teeth. And I saw the eyes. They weren't shut in anticipation of the recoil. They were wide open. In that millisecond of illumination, I saw the pupils contract. I saw the intelligence burning behind the amber irises. There was no fear there. There was only shock and a deep, ancient hatred. It looked at me not like prey, but like an enemy. Boom, boom, boom. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I pulled the trigger as fast as the slide could cycle, screaming silently into the ringing void. Hot brass casings ejected from the chamber, bouncing off the windshield, stinging my face and clattering onto the dash. The strobe light flickered, flash, dark, creating a staccato movie of violence. In the second flash, I saw the creature's head jerk back. A spray of dark mist, blood, erupted from its snout. In the third, I saw it snarl, a glob of blood and spit flying from its mouth. In the fourth, I saw it flinch, squeezing its eyes shut as a round clipped its ear, tearing a chunk of flesh away. I emptied the magazine, 15 rounds in under 3 seconds. The slide locked back with a metallic clack that I felt more than heard. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and biting. The smell of gunpowder warred with the stench of the beast. I sat there, chest heaving, clicking the trigger on an empty chamber. Click, click, click. The creature was gone from the window. I blinked, my eyes stinging from the smoke. The window frame was empty. The rain and fog swirled into the cab, cold and indifferent. I scrambled forward, grabbing the dash to pull myself up, peering through the shattered glass. A dark shape was thrashing on the asphalt near the front bumper. It let out a sound that I will never forget, not a roar, but a high-pitched yelp, like a dog that's been kicked, only amplified to the volume of a siren. It was a sound of pain, yes, but also of confusion. It spun in a tight circle, shaking its massive head, sending droplets of blood flying into the mist. It swiped at its own face, as if trying to brush away the stinging hornets I had unleashed. Then it stopped. It stood up on its hind legs again, towering over the hood of the ruined cruiser. It looked down at me through the broken windshield. The yellow eyes were dimmer now, narrowed in agony, but the malice was still there. Blood was dripping from its muzzle, pooling on the black fur of its chest. We locked eyes one last time. My gun was empty. My backup magazine was in the pouch on my belt, but my hands were shaking so violently I knew I couldn't reload in time. If it decided to come back in, I was dead. I was meat. But it didn't come back. It sneered, a distinct curling of the lip that exposed a bloody canine, and let out a sharp, exhaled breath that fogged the air between us. It wasn't fear that made it leave. It was boredom. It was the calculation that the meal was no longer worth the injury. The creature turned with that same impossible, fluid grace. It dropped to all fours and launched itself toward the guardrail. In one bound, it cleared the steel barrier. I saw the black shape hang in the air for a second, silhouetted against the gray fog, before it plunged into the ravine below. The sound of it crashing through the rhododendrons and snapping saplings echoed up from the dark, fading rapidly as it put distance between us. Then silence returned. I sat in the ruined driver's seat, surrounded by glass shards, spent casings, and the smell of sulfur. My ears were ringing so loud I couldn't hear the engine, but I could feel the vibration of it, a steady, mechanical heartbeat that told me I was still alive. I looked at the empty gun in my hand. I looked at the blood smeared on the dashboard, dark, thick blood that didn't look quite red in the dim light. I began to laugh. It was a broken, hysterical sound that hurt my chest. I laughed until I choked, tears streaming down my face, mixing with the grime and the monster's spit. I was alive. The cage had held just barely. But as I stared out into the swirling fog, watching the spot where the thing had vanished, I knew the truth. It hadn't fled. It had just decided to wait for an easier night. Dawn didn't break so much as it bled into the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a sickly gray, slowly revealing the devastation around me. The fog, which had felt like a living accomplice to the nightmare all night, finally began to lift, retreating into the high canopy like a tide pulling back to reveal a shipwreck. I was still sitting in the driver's seat, shivering uncontrollably. The adrenaline crash had hit me about 20 minutes ago, leaving me nauseous and weak. My uniform was torn at the shoulder, the fabric stiff with dried blood, some mine, some from the thing that had tried to eat me. The cruiser looked like it had been put through a compactor. The roof was caved in, pressing down so low I had to crane my neck to see out the windshield. The light bar was gone, just a tangle of wires and shattered plastic. The driver's side window was non-existent, the door frame bent outward like a peel of aluminum. At 06:15 a.m., the silence finally broke. It wasn't a roar. It was the sound of tires on wet asphalt. I watched in the rearview mirror as a pair of headlights cut through the lingering mist. A state police SUV pulled up behind me, its blue lights flashing lazily. The door opened, and Roger Sullivan stepped out. Roger was a big man, built like a linebacker who had gone to seed, usually found with a donut in one hand and a radio mic in the other. He looked small now. He walked toward my cruiser, his boots crunching on the glass that littered the road for 30 feet. He stopped at the driver's window, or what was left of it. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the roof. He stared at the claw marks, 4 deep parallel grooves that had stripped the paint down to the bare steel and gouged into the metal itself. He looked at the steering wheel, bent in half. "Holy Mother of God," Roger whispered. He looked at me, his face pale in the morning light. "Chris, you okay?" I nodded slowly. I couldn't find my voice. I just held up my empty Glock, the slide still locked back. Roger opened the door. It screamed in protest, the hinges twisted, but it gave way. He helped me out, his grip firm on my uninjured arm. My legs felt like rubber as I stood up on the asphalt. "Bear, huh?" I croaked, my voice sounding like gravel rattling in a tin can. I pointed at the roof. "That's a hell of a bear, Roger." Roger followed my finger. He looked at the marks. He looked at the massive, muddy footprint on the hood, a print with 5 distinct toes and a heel that looked unsettlingly human. He swallowed hard. I saw the struggle in his eyes. I saw the moment his brain tried to process the evidence and failed. He was looking at the impossible, and I watched him actively choose to reject it. "Big black bear," Roger said, his voice tight. "Must have been a rogue male, maybe rabid. They get crazy strength when they're rabid." "It had hands, Roger," I said softly. "It stood 8 feet tall. It laughed at me." Roger turned to me, his expression hardening. It wasn't anger, it was fear. "Don't," he said. "Just don't. You're in shock. You hit your head. We're gonna get you to the ER, get you checked out." I know what I saw. "Chris, listen to me," Roger hissed, stepping closer, blocking my view of the woods. "You write that down. You write down werewolf or monster, and they'll pull your badge. They'll put you on a psych hold so fast your head will spin. You want to lose your pension. You want your kids to hear their dad lost his mind on Route 19. I looked at him. I looked at the dark tree line, silent and empty now. I thought about the yellow eyes. I thought about the intelligence I had seen in that muzzle flash. "What do I write?" I asked, defeated. "Bear attack," Roger said firmly. "Aggressive wildlife encounter. Vehicle sustained heavy damage. Officer discharged weapon in self-defense. Suspect fled." The tow truck arrived an hour later. The driver didn't ask questions. He just hooked the cruiser up, winching the crumpled metal onto the flatbed without making eye contact. He worked these mountain roads long enough to know when to keep his mouth shut. They found the blood on the asphalt, a lot of it. But by the time the crime scene techs got there, it had started to rain. The mountain washed away the evidence, diluting the black blood until it was just another dark stain on the highway. I filed the report just like Roger said, bear attack. I took 2 weeks of administrative leave. When I came back, I requested a transfer. I moved to the day shift in Charleston, working traffic detail on the interstate. No woods, no dead zones, just concrete, sunlight, and thousands of people. I never went back to Route 19. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I can still smell the sulfur. I know what's out there. The official reports are redacted, filed away in boxes in a damp basement in the state capitol, labeled wildlife incidents. They attribute the missing hikers to falls or exposure. They blame the mangled cars on drunk driving or deer strikes. But I know that there are things in the deep hollers that don't belong in biology textbooks. I know there are predators that have watched us pave their hunting grounds and haven't retreated. They've just adapted. They've learned that our cars are just tin cans and our guns are just noise. The Dogman didn't leave because I heard it. It left because it learned what it needed to know. It tested me. It measured the strength of the steel and the power of the weapon, and it survived. It's been 5 years since that night. I still carry a backup piece on my ankle. I still check the locks on my doors 3 times before I go to sleep. And I never, ever drive through the mountains after dark. So if you're listening to this, and you find yourself driving through West Virginia on a lonely stretch of highway, listen to me. If you see a deer carcass on the road that looks twisted and broken, don't get out to check it. If your radio starts to scramble with a rhythm like heavy breathing, don't try to tune it. And if you see a pair of yellow eyes floating in the fog, hovering 7 feet off the ground, don't stop, don't slow down, don't pray. Just drive. Drive as fast as you can and don't look in your rear-view mirror, because if you do, you might see what I saw. You might see that the eyes aren't falling behind. You might see that they're keeping pace.